The following program was produced by a community producer. The content, views, and opinions expressed are the sole responsibility of the community producer and do not reflect Malden Access Television, the City of Malden, or your cable provider. MATV welcomes your comments. Call us at 781-321-6400 or email us at access@matv.org.
Hi, my name is Ose Schwab. I'm host of Inside Malden, Ideas and Stories That Inspire. I'm here at 89 Commercial Street, the new home of Idle Hands Craft Ales. And I'm here to introduce my next guests, Chris and Grace Tkach. They have wonderful beer here, by the way. Chris and Grace Tkach, welcome to Inside Malden.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say congratulations on your reopening of Idle Hands Craft Ales.
Thank you again.
July 7th, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm delighted you're here. There's so much I want to ask you about. I've been learning a bit about the industry and it's fascinating. So let's start with the what and tell me what is Idle Hands Craft Ales?
So we are what is called a microbrewery, which means we're just not a large conglomerate that's brewing mass amounts of beer.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, definitely more artisanal in nature.
Yes.
And we brew a variety of Belgian and German styles of beer, as well as a couple American styles.
Define for me artisanal.
Okay. Artisanal, the way we define artisanal is that it's truly a handcrafted product.
Yes.
We're not using a lot of automation in our process.
Okay.
The ingredients that go into our beer are not necessarily the mass-marketed ingredients that you'd find that Anheuser-Busch or some of the larger mega brewers use. We're really looking to create a lot of flavor out of our beers and not just produce a mass bland product in the end.
And you use local products or items that grow locally, perhaps? Or?
Beer, it's made out of 4 essential ingredients. Malt or barley, a grain, hops, which is a flour in essence, yeast, and water. Other than water, that stuff isn't available on any sort of scale inside of Massachusetts. There are a couple craft maltsters that have recently opened, and they do source some grains from the western part of the state. But by and large, the stuff that we're sourcing is stuff from Europe, Canada, the western part of the U.S. as well, because those are the ingredients that tend to create the flavors that we want in the beers that we're producing.
Okay. What's the strangest ingredient that you've used in beer, if there are any additional ones?
We have used sweet potatoes in beers before. Yeah.
That's cool.
We made a beer called Rosemary for Remembrance back in Everett.
Wow.
It was our answer to the pumpkin beer craze.
Yeah.
I always say that we'll never produce a pumpkin beer out of Idle Hands, but we wanted to create something that was, along that fall seasonal characteristic.
So it was aptly introduced around Thanksgiving, so we thought it would be appropriate for the season as well.
Now you, so part of your role is you provide these interesting flavors in your beers, and then you try new ones all the time. Is there constant innovation? Is that part of the process for you?
There's certainly some experimental natures to some of the beers that we produce. In general, we have maybe 3 or 4 beers that we produce year-round. And then other ones are seasonal in nature, other ones are rotational, and then some others are just kind of one-offs that we do. Part of the craft beer movement, I think, has to do with experimentation in general and coming up with new flavors. and new ideas on how to produce beers that are maybe somewhat novel. So we try to encompass some of that when we're making our beers, but at the same time we do want to make sure that the product that we're making is up to our standards and that we're not adding things to our beers just for the sake of a novelty.
I see. So you care about the product, not just the innovation process.
Exactly.
Tell me a little bit about this industry that you represent, and if you can sort of capture its essence, or it almost feels like a movement to me. I don't know if you would describe it that way, but
I would say it certainly started out that way.
Okay.
The craft beer movement really had its roots in the early 80s, and you had a lot of breweries that opened kind of as a first wave, if you will. It's Sam Adams, Harpoon, some of the big names that you know today started out then. And then it sort of kind of went through a little bit of a bubble where we had a lot of people that were getting into the industry, not necessarily because they cared about beer, but because they cared about money or some other aspect that they were trying to derive out of it. And so there was that bubble kind of burst in the I would say late 90s, early 2000s, and then there's been a reemergence of craft beer again, starting probably in the 2008, 2009 time frame. So the second wave is really what we've kind of caught on ourselves.
the more authentic wave where
Yeah,
the people
but
are
it's
purists about it?
To some degree, I think that each wave has started out that way, and then
I see.
as it's become more and more prevalent and mainstream, other people have started coming into the industry, and now we're seeing a lot of private equity and family, what they call family offices, dumping money into these breweries because they're seeing dollar signs and not necessarily seeing the passion behind the company and the product.
Right.
Yeah, it's not unlike, I think, what's going on a macro level in terms of, I think for a while there with automation and things becoming less expensive and, things just that you normally would find specialty became a little bit of a commodity.
Yes.
And I know, over the years, people have just wanted things. It's sort of like Burger King, like have it your way.
Right.
So I think a lot of sort of mom and pops have sort of come out of that movement. I think the economy, at that same time frame, wasn't quite as strong. It was sort of coming out of the tech bubble as well, and so I think a lot of people felt like there was an opportunity to start their own businesses, and it's certainly a passion area. It's sort of a lifestyle business, but to be able to do things kind of your way and not necessarily be a mass product. Not everybody wants to be Walmart or Amazon or whoever else makes mass products. So
Unless you're a private equity
Right.
company that's dumping money in there and you need your return on investment.
Right.
We've never had those grandiose plans with idle hands.
Right.
It is a family-made business,
Right.
family-run business, family-financed business. So it's and we did that on a very specific reason. It's because we wanted to control our own destiny. We wanted to produce the beers that we loved. We didn't want to have to be beholden to stockholders or investors saying that I need to cash out, in 5 years, and I better get a 5x, multiple on the money I put in. We don't have that pressure, which is nice.
I heard one gentleman speak about his journey becoming a brewer, and he talked passionately about when you drink a beer that he's created, you have an essence of him in that beer, that it's very much a personal process that you can feel or sense or taste, the essence, which is quite, abstract. But I thought that was interesting the way he spoke about it as a very personal contribution to community and a tasting experience.
And I think that's somewhat true. As you're brewing that beer, you are toiling over it. It's not like you're sitting behind a control panel and pushing buttons like you do at the larger breweries.
Right.
So you're there. You're dumping the grain into the mash tun. You're turning
present,
valves.
you're
You're
engaged.
pushing buttons to turn pumps on and other things. But
grating lemons.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, grating lemons. Other things that are very time consuming and require the use of your hands.
So there's another aspect that your story sort of confirms, and that is there's a or collaborative feeling, at least from what I've read, in this industry, that the brewers are not proprietary, but they often share recipes or share information, and they support each other through the process. Is that accurate, would you say? I mean, for the most part, obviously, it's not always going to be the case, but...
Yeah, it's very much a collegial environment. Is the best way to kind of describe
That's a nice
it.
description.
You know, if there's any point in time where we're about to brew a beer and we're missing hops because I goofed the order or something like that, I can call, 5 different breweries around the area and see if they have some, and every one of them is going to give me a box of hops, if they can. And it just happened actually 2 weeks ago. When I did that, and we're like, well, we're out of Cascade hops, and I thought we had a box, but we didn't. And so I sent out a text message to, Cambridge Brewing, Mystic, Winter Hill, and every one of them's like, yeah, I got a box, when can you come pick it up?
Now, weren't you actually, while you were transitioning to Malden, you were brewing in another brewer's space, correct?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about
that. Yeah,
that.
so, we had a little bit of a gap between, I wouldn't say a little gap, but a large gap.
Large gap.
Between when we had to vacate the Everett location and before we could get the Malden location up and running. And during that time frame, one of our good friends over at Night Shift in Everett volunteered some floor space so that we could bring a couple of our tanks over there and continue brewing our beer in a limited basis so that we basically didn't disappear from the market, which would have happened had they not been there.
To me, that's such an incredible inspiration. I mean, how many other businesses work in that way? I mean, proprietary is sort of the name of the game, or it's sort of a past, but still a very present modus operandi. So I think it's an inspiration to the rest of the business world.
I can't thank those guys enough, for allowing us to do that. Because without that, I'm not sure we'd be here today.
Right.
I mean, we have a long history with Night Shift. We actually. We actually started in Everett 6 months before they did, and they came in and actually had, reached out to Chris as they were looking at the brewery to look at space and things like that. And Chris was like, the more the merrier. We wanted to. It was nice to create a little bit of a hub or focus area in this random part of Everett, and it became sort of like this. You go to Everett and you can go to this where you see 2 breweries, and certainly our I think
walk 5 feet.
And walk 5 feet. I mean, we would have
Gosh.
people go back and forth from both of them, and we would do the same too. And I know they were constantly, sharing each other's beers with each other too. So, talk about the collaboration. Our history with Night Shift has definitely gone far. And we have very different sort of approaches, but.
Sure.
It's
Which makes it interesting.
It makes it interesting, but not in a competitive way. In a very that's really interesting. They're doing it that way. We're going to stay true to what we want to do, and but it's been great to see both of us be successful.
I love that. So I really want to know why. Why did you go into this industry? Now I know that you got a birthday gift from your uncle, was it? At 21?
Yeah, it was.
And that started the whole business? No.
I can't remember if it was a birthday gift or a Christmas gift. I almost want to think it was a Christmas gift.
Okay, perhaps.
I was still in college at the time, and I had.
What were you studying?
Civil engineering.
Okay, so it's sort of science-oriented.
Yeah, I
pursuit.
very much an engineering kind of scientific background. But prior to getting that gift, I think I must have gone up to my uncle's at one point and just brewed beer with him a couple times and kind of enjoyed that process. And he got me that kit for Christmas, and I kind of sat in the corner for a couple months. I was living in a house with like 7 or 8 other guys, off campus. It was, as you can imagine, a disaster in a party zone and all that, those stereotypical things.
Yes.
And then one day I'm like, let's make some beer. I have this kit. Let's do it. So we scrubbed down the kitchen so it was immaculately clean because you need to make sure that everything is as sanitary and clean as possible before you brew beer. And then we brewed that first beer, and it was okay. It was drinkable, but I had roommates, and it was free alcohol, and they consumed it all, and were happy.
They were thrilled.
And so that's the home brewing. That's how you get started. And your first couple batches, they're gonna, frankly, they're gonna suck. but they get better once you get your process down and you start learning, why they, the mistakes that you made. Then you improve upon that, and then eventually you get better and better and better. And so that's what I did, and I got more immersed into the hobby. I got really more interested in it, but at the same time, I was going to school for civil engineering.
Interesting.
And I felt I would do a disservice to myself if I just, ditched that and decided to become a brewer. So I spent, the next, 10, 12, 15 years, I guess, working in the professional world. Oddly enough, not as a civil engineer. That career lasted about 13 months. But I got into software engineering and development, and
cousins,
that
right?
was that was kind of what I did for from a professional standpoint before idle hands.
And so he kept the brewing as a hobby, and fast forward a couple more years, I think when we met.
Your first date, wasn't it? Didn't you choose the right beer?
I chose the right beer. For whatever reason, it was. I had no idea what my future would hold, but we met, and first date met for drinks, and I didn't order the standard sort of Amstel Light or Heineken. I actually ordered a German double, which at the time was my favorite and still is one. Chimay Red. Yep. And I think that probably sparked something in him. But when we started dating, he was still getting his MBA, and I had sort of my own hobbies, but we were spending a lot of time together. Right. And I think he found time to actually have his hobby again, because I think maybe on the personal side that might have been a little bit more stable, having met me. And so he got into brewing, and I think you had said it was 6 years that he hadn't brewed.
A good while before I had a gap of not home brewing at all.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I just didn't have a place that was conducive to doing it. I was living in apartments, and it just, there was no place to kind of really do it. Small kitchens, no place to ferment the beer. We could keep the temperature stable and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just really quickly backtrack for a second back to your childhood, and I want to ask you a strange question, and that is, what did you dream about being or doing as a kid, if you can remember? And you can both answer that.
I'll let you go first on that.
Yeah, it's funny, we were talking about this. I always had some notion that I wanted to own some sort of business, retail. I remember just distinctly drawing pictures of signs of like the company that, and it wasn't anything, it was like, at the time I was probably like a teenage girl and I wanted to own a paraphernalia, like a stationary paraphernalia store, pink pens, purple pens, ones with feathers, things like that.
That sounds nice.
And I think a lot of little girls probably want to own some sort of, I don't know, maybe a boutique or something like that. Or,
right, fancy clothes.
Yeah, I was the kid on the corner that tried to do the lemonade stand, but I didn't just do lemonade. I think I tried to diversify even at a young age. But I think I always had a desire to be more on the business side.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think I ever thought I'd be a co-owner of a brewery, but it's sort of been a great way to tap into that long lost interest, and still hold a regular job.
That's a good word to use. Tap into.
No feather
No
pens.
pun intended.
No feather pens there.
No feather pens yet.
Feather pens. I honestly don't remember.
Yeah.
I can fast forward, or I can remember maybe back to high school. I really wanted to be an architect. I would say that's probably my earliest recollection, really, other than, everybody wants to be an astronaut and a fireman and stuff like that, but I don't really count that as kind of your first
standard,
what you wanted to be. And I really enjoyed, I took a couple drafting classes in high school, and I really enjoyed that aspect of sitting down and drawing and kind of creating and thinking about, how things went together. And I spent a little bit of time researching that profession, and came to the conclusion that architects don't really build things, which was kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time chasing after permits and stuff
That's
like that, and I'm like, that's not what I want to do. And so one of my mom's friends' daughter was an architect, and talking to her, she's like, you should think about civil engineering or architectural, or architectural engineering, structural engineering, because you want to build a building. You want to create something. You want to design something. And that kind of pushed me down that path of getting into engineering
That makes sense.
and pursuing that as a career, which ultimately didn't work out that way. But no, what I say about engineering is it teaches you a lot about critical thinking and how to solve problems. And owning a business and owning a manufacturing business, you're constantly faced with problems.
Right.
Well, and that civil engineering background really came in handy as I was figuring out load bearing and putting up, the glycol and just the physical build out of the space. I was amazed I was like, oh wow, you are using your degree.
That's
finally.
true. Actually, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So, which brings me to another question. Now, if you reflect back on your childhood and your upbringing, are there aspects of that experience that has prepared you for what you're doing now?
Well, we both have business degrees. We both pursued our master's in business. My undergrad is also in business. Again, I think because I come from a family that was mostly in the healthcare industry.
And you grew up where?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia, so I'm a transplant to the Boston area. But coming up here has been fantastic to, for many reasons. But
It's because you met me.
But I think I just personally have always liked to think about maybe I don't know if it's the commerce aspect, but the broader aspect of business. My day job's in human resources, and I've been doing that for over 20 years, so it's very much the people side of things, but you get a great opportunity to see like the whole organization. And for me, it's fascinating to watch businesses and understand why they get to where they do and their strategy. And ultimately for me, it gets down to the people. So I think that is probably works out well with his more engineering sort of creativity, knowing about how to make beer kind of helps, background.
Yeah, I mean, just brewing beer in general, it scratches kind of that itch of science and engineering, as well as adds a little bit of artistic kind of creativity to the whole thing. So, you get to work out both sides of the mind in doing that. Which is, I think, is why you find a lot of brewers start out in either a field of science or engineering, because they want to balance that, that pure science with kind of a little bit of kind of creativity and artistic flair.
So when you talked about this notion of starting a business, was there some, well, no, we shouldn't do that, or like, was there some kind of negative voices from the outside or the inside, or no, was it both, you were on board?
We were, when we started talking about it, we were definitely both on board. If you asked us today, we might have. No, but I mean.
We've had a few challenges along the way, right?
Yeah, but I think it was just, Chris said he wanted to do this. I'm like, sure.
That's a great deal.
Yeah, I know, right?
I think by then we were
I don't think
already,
she realized what she was in for, though.
No, and by then we were already married, so I kind of, but I think both of us, really, Chris had done so much reading and had continued this passion. And again, when we started dating, he started brewing again and got back into it, after a bit of a hiatus. And what really sealed the deal was coming back from a ski trip. We stopped off at Maine Beer Company, and I don't remember what the year was, 2009 maybe. They had just started, 2010. They had just started. They were working out of like a 1,000 square foot sort of industrial bay, and we physically got to see them in action and said, hey, at the very least, it's a hobby that will pay itself. And they were very successful at that time. They had just started, and I think it just clicked for Chris in terms of, wow, this is what I want to do. Yeah,
because all my research had really kind of led you to think that you needed to create something grandiose and big in order for it to be successful. And at the time, the 2009, 2010, 2011 time frame, you started to see the birth of what we call the nano breweries. So really, really small brewing operations, right, micro, nano. And that's what Maine Beer Company was at the time. And there hadn't really been anything like that in Massachusetts, with the exception of one that was out west. But having sat down and talked to the guys at Maine Beer, they were really, really gracious and kind of just said, let us do the whole thing. For a good half hour, we chatted about it. And I was still in business school, and I'm like, well, are you successful with this? And he's like, it's paying for itself.
Wow.
You know, we're not making any money ourselves off of it, but eventually that will come. And I think that just kind of, you know, clicked. I'm like, okay, this is possible on a much smaller scale than I was imagining, and a much lower barrier to entry. That was previously what I thought was possible.
I mean, that said, Chris, you know, when he did start, he did keep his day job for at least a year and a half, and it was sort of a way to enter again at the smaller scale without putting a ton of risk in. And you know, I think it was that day that you finished up your full-time job was like, wow, we're really doing it.
Yeah.
That was a little bit different,
Scary.
like a little longer conversation.
I was-
We
I
weren't, like,
was-
jumping into it
I was
as
pretty
fast.
miserable for that year, though. I mean, having to burn the candle at both ends
Oh
was,
yeah,
was
that's a
pretty
lot
tough.
of work.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
So, you know, we made a family decision that, like, hey, let's just, you know, he had actually been very supportive of me, and when I had some challenges with my career a couple years before, I'm like, okay, it's my turn. So, if I'm going to be the breadwinner, and you know, you're going to do this full time, like, I want to support you. I want you to be happy just as much as you want you to be happy. So,
Right. So let's talk a little bit about now then once you made the decision and then you opened up in Everett, right? Is that where you started? And just talk about some of the challenges that came your way and what sort of fueled your onward motion.
We certainly had some challenges from
course.
the get-go.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding, you know, the general construction build-out challenges that everybody really faces.
You mean here in Malden or
Well,
even
just in
before?
general,
Oh,
just
I see.
building
Right.
a business.
Sure.
You know,
building
from
anything.
Building
Right,
anything,
building
really.
anything, right, yeah.
Because that took much longer than we anticipated. But we came across some licensing challenges, you know,
Okay.
right from the get-go with the state. Not everybody knows, probably understands this, but all of the brewers in the state hold what is called a farmer brewer license,
Okay.
which really doesn't hold necessarily any relationships to farmers, but I think originally that's how that license was designed, so that a farmer could create a brewery on his premise and use ingredients that he had to kind of create the beers, as a way to kind of incentivize farmers to, you know, diversify their, you know, their income streams. But what had happened, I think, over the years is that license got somewhat co-opted and became the de facto small brewer's license in the state. And so that everybody held that license. Harpoon, Sam Adams, you name a brewery, they had a farmer brewer license. So when we went to go apply for our farmer brewer license back in early 2011, we basically received a notification from the ABCC saying that your license is under review, but we are now instituting some new rules. We're reinterpreting the license as a farmer brewer that all your 50% of your ingredients need to be sourced within the city, within the state.
And Chris had done a lot of homework. Again, talk about collaboration. He had reached out to the larger breweries and talked about how to, you know, from a licensing, how does it work? He did his homework. So we were thinking, our understanding was like, you know, it's a process, but we can get through it, and, you know, based on practice.
Yes.
And so we got the notice that we actually had to go to a hearing. Eventually, I mean, I remember we were going on vacation and we were hoping to hear about the license beforehand, and then we heard that we had to go to a hearing, which is, I think, soon after that vacation. And during the vacation, we're like, what are they going to ask us? Like, you know, and they're specifically pointing out this one clause, which our understanding was that they were interpreting it differently than what had been practiced.
Gotcha.
So we, you know, doing our homework, we did our PowerPoint presentation, and we, you know, we put together our argument in terms of why we felt like we could receive this license, and it was a very stressful day, I think, to go into that hearing.
But you did get it after that.
Well,
No.
not after,
No.
Not after that.
Actually, no, we were actually technically denied.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Based on the fact that we couldn't source the ingredients that we needed from inside the state. And they then put the entire industry on notice that anybody who had a farmer brewer license was going to be held to the standard, which basically created an enormous uproar within the brewing community here in the state,
Okay.
because it affected everybody.
Everybody.
it would have resulted in pretty much all the brewers not being able to hold that
Gotcha.
license.
Right.
So
what other, so there's licensing and there's the bureaucracy that you have to work within, which I know a lot of businesses feel encumbered by, but then there was the being cast out by the casino and then having to spend a year building this new. Tell me about that. And but most importantly, what kept you going? Like what did you think about? Like what was inspiring you through that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just kind of briefly touch over that because people may not know, what that all entailed.
The backstory.
Yeah, the backstory. But back in early 2015, the land that our brewery was on was sold by the current owner to Wynn Casino. It's part of the casino project and a private transaction. And on that land, there was 20 some odd businesses that all received notices that they needed to vacate within 30 days. And this was February.
30 days?
This was February of the intensely crazy snow year that we had in 2015.
That's crazy.
And this was also, I mean, to Chris's credit, he had been paying attention to the talks about the casino and, had done his research and actually found out about the sale by his own research. It wasn't forthcoming. It wasn't, they're not required to be forthcoming because it was a private sale, but he found out about this. So we actually even ourselves knew a little bit before that notice, but when we got that notice, to move a brewery in 30 days was a little surprising.
You can't even move a regular business in 30 days, never mind a brewery.
Not even a household.
Yeah, right. So, it was a big scramble, and, I did everything I could to talk to the city, which they weren't very, accommodating, to be honest with you, which was disappointing, because they were really, they really wanted, or they had indicated that they really wanted our business to stay in Everett. But really, when it came down to brass tacks, they were, hands off. So, we begged and pleaded with, Wynn to stay there as long as we possibly could, and we kept on extending and eventually got to the point in, I think, October that we were able to really, pack everything up and get out of there. But that required a lot of legal maneuverings and begging and other stuff.
And costs.
And costs, lots of costs. And all through that time, we had started already doing the research of finding another location back in, I would say, summer of 2014, because we knew that this was probably an eventuality that we were going to have to move the brewery, and we were at the point where we were starting to outgrow our existing space anyways. So we started doing that, and my first step in doing that is just to call City Hall in every single town.
Really?
And talk to somebody in the economic development office and say, hey, do you guys want a brewery in your town? Because if you don't want a brewery in your town, I'm not gonna force it down, your throat, because nobody wins in those situations.
The local licensing then just becomes challenged.
Yeah, everything becomes
on top
a challenge.
of the federal and state.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So, but I called Kevin Duffy in the mayor's office, and he.
And did he jump up?
Yeah, yeah. He's like, what are you doing tomorrow? I got a bunch of properties I want to show you, which is great. So I met with Kevin and we drove around Malden and looked at a bunch of places. And at that time, we didn't really find anything that kind of suited our needs, because we were very specific on what we wanted. We wanted to basically solve all these problems that we had in our old location in terms of accessibility, in terms of just general size and cleanliness, and presentability, and having the ability to kind of create something in our own vision versus trying to have to shoehorn something into something that was already existing. And so we didn't really quite find that, at first go around. But I started working with a commercial real estate broker on the buy side, and he did a lot of legwork, and then eventually 89 Commercial Street came back up kind of as a possibility. And I think that was, I want to say, end of 2014, beginning of 2015, when that showed back up. And then it took so at that time we're like, all right, I think we have a location nailed down, and it was getting through the lease. It took a long, long time to get the lease negotiated. And at that same time, we're trying to vacate out of our old location in Everett. So there were like two balls up in the air. All the balls are up in the air at one point in time, and I'm like, I
But also
this works.
realistically, at the same time, the whole industry was actually like, at the same time, there were so many other breweries that were coming up. So our biggest concern too is just to remain relevant.
Right.
So I mean, it would have been one thing if you could just shut down your doors and then deal with the move and everything piecemeal. But the reality was, we were also being faced with there's a lot of great competition, and so with we weren't the hot number of the day anymore. There were a lot of new ones coming up, but we still wanted to be relevant. So he had to find a way to deal with just distribution, because we wouldn't keep brewing, making a product and distributing, because our license,
Our license, the farmer brewer license, ties you to self-distribution, which is why every brewery wants it, so they can control their destiny to some degree. So through the course of the transition from Everett to Malden, we essentially lost all our licensing. And so we then had to go start working with a distributor to get the beer that we're brewing on a night shift to ultimately the
so we had to change
stores.
a lot of our processes and our model, and at the same time we had a child, which probably didn't help.
Let's throw that on there.
Throw that on top
a
of
little
it.
bit of a challenge on top of that. Well, so now that you're in Malden, and you can sort of look back to these challenges and see, what you've been through a lot, and but what are you hoping for now going forward? And let's say just with Idle Hands, what would be dreamy in your mind to accomplish or do with Idle Hands?
Well, we've always, both Grace and I have always said that this business is going to be a lifestyle business, and what I mean by that is that we're not trying to create Sam Adams or Harpoon or really even Night Shift to some degree,
or get acquired by
or get
large
acquired
to
by,
make money.
We're in this because we are passionate about the beer and are passionate about the people that we work with and employ,
Running a business.
and running a business, and hopefully everybody makes money in the end. But not to the point where I'm making billions of dollars and my employees are
We're
making
realistic on
pennies.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. And nobody really does that in the brewing industry, particularly on a small scale.
Right.
So to me, it's more about maintaining that passion and conveying that to our customers and making sure that they enjoy the beer that we enjoy making. So Malden's been a great city for us so far. We've had a tremendous reception from the local population that have been coming in. They're just so excited to have a brewery in their town, it's very refreshing to see that excitement. It's what keeps me going.
There's lots of excitement. Malden is an interesting place too, though, for you demographically, because I noted on the statistics that the typical appreciator of a craft brew is typically more of the males, more white, right? And the other demographics are a little bit lower. And I'm curious how you're thinking about that. For example, even we have, as you probably know, lots of people from China or Southeast Asia, and I'm just curious if there's some sort of thinking business-wise, how are you going to reach this, interesting mix of people?
I'm not sure we've necessarily thought down that road that far yet. We just now have gotten open and have gotten our feet back underneath ourselves. I have some ideas in the back of my head about brewing very specific beers that might cater to those populations, if you will.
Would you mind sharing? Or are they top secret?
No, not even top secret. They're just like
evolving.
We should make something that has some ingredients that are relevant to.
Like a lychee.
Like lychee or something like that.
That's
to
cool.
the cuisines that are that you find around Malden.
That's very cool.
But again, those are just kind of ideas in the head right now.
And do you find, are you thinking that it's sort of like a feedback loop, like you'll have people coming in and they might say, oh, it would be really cool if you tried this, or is
All
there
the time.
all the time?
And that's not a bad thing, particularly, that's one of the purposes of having the tap room, really, is to have that face of the brewery and that interaction with your end customer in your establishment and your business, so that if somebody's like, here's a great name for a beer, or it'd be interesting if you could, incorporate this type of ingredient or something like that. And, we're certainly receptive to hearing those.
Yeah. Well, as we start to talk about the last question I have and sort of winding down, I'm wondering if we could do a little taste of the beer that you brought.
Absolutely.
And because what would be a conversation about craft brewery without tasting something, right?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me what you have.
And I just happen to have one right here.
Oh, wow! What a coincidence.
I know, right? So one of the beers that we produce is called Blanche de Grasse.
Ah, and isn't that named after
It is
you?
my
It
namesake.
is.
Oh,
It is, and I
boy.
thought it'd be appropriate to bring that beer today.
Yes.
It is a Belgian wit. It's
Oh,
brewed
good.
with some coriander, some orange peel, and some lemon peel. It's
Oh.
really kind of a nice summery, refreshing, citrusy type of beer.
Nice.
It's still kind of hot outside, so I think it's
Yes.
a great beer to
I
try.
love it.
So we package these things in our what we call our freshies, which are cans that are canned right there in the tap room.
Yep.
So you can come in there. And
Otherwise known as a crawly.
otherwise known as a crowler in the
Crowler,
industry. Yep, it's
yeah.
32-ounce can that's freshly sealed right there at the brewery.
So one can pick that up.
One
at
can
the-
buy that at the brewery. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
terrific!
Yep. Right in the
Excellent.
tap room.
Awesome.
Fresh pour.
So while you're pouring that, my last question is sort of around, you had touched on this a little bit about people being so important, and I'm thinking community, Malden, the community, and even already what you're doing is building community. It's your space is community building, but you have activities that are community minded. And so tell me a little bit about how you see the connection between building community in a city like Malden and your business.
Our business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, you know, the beer itself is sort of a level setting, sort of creates sort of a level setting opportunity. I mean, a majority of people do drink it, and for those who don't, you know, it at least represents more of a social setting.
Yes.
Where, you know, it's kind of like sports. And everybody
Yes.
gets around the Patriots, or they
Yes.
don't. And it's something that most people can generally kind of become involved in, whether they're partaking or not. And we have things like, we just had a yoga group that came into the brewery. We're trying to encourage like a beer brunch on Sunday
love
mornings,
that.
which is it's
Beer brunch.
eggs
Along with a fun run.
along with a fun run. So it's a fun run and egg sandwiches and then beer.
Wow.
So I think there are so many opportunities to create even just like it's almost like having a community center. And by the way, you have beer there.
Yeah,
Right.
I love
Right.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
And I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that we are having an Oktoberfest on October 1 at
Okay.
the brewery. So
Well,
we're going to
that's
have tents outside. We're working with some local vendors to have the food available. I'm pretty sure we got DOMs.
Oh, good.
So
Right
they'll
down the
be
street,
there,
sort
yeah,
of,
grilling
yeah.
some
Yeah.
sausages. We'll have some live entertainment.
That sounds
yeah.
terrific.
One of the things that we did make a point of is we don't have actually television sets in the brewery. And when I moved up to the Boston area, I was like amazed that every single restaurant, bar you go to has TVs because of all our sports. And so it was a cognizant decision not to have those TVs because, as Chris has always said, and we've always said again, you know, you can just sit down and have a beer and talk. And that, I think, in and of itself, like, we don't talk to each other anymore. We're looking down here, or we're sending emails, and there's just a value of
If I could block the
Thank you for
Wi-Fi
for
signal
that
in our
decision.
brewery, I
Thank you.
probably
You're
would.
welcome. Yeah, I mean, how many times have we, you know, on our vacation sat down and just had a beer? It was sort of the thing to do when we went on vacation to try out these new breweries, and we're like, what are you going to talk about, Chris? And inevitably, we did have something to talk about. So we'd like to, I think, building community from that perspective is, let's get back to, like, just interacting with each other. And
I mean,
if it's
the
over a good beer, that's great.
You know, the tap room's designed for that. You know,
Exactly.
we don't have small individual tables. Everything's more on a communal type of basis. We want people to sit down next to somebody that you may not know, you know, and strike up a conversation. You know, we have these little cards in there that are kind of conversation starters, you know,
That's
that you can kind of run
fantastic.
through and
Oh, that's another
hopefully break
lovely
the ice
thing.
with somebody that you may have not met before.
So, on that note, I think it's appropriate to have a toast. And let's toast to your success, which will be our success as a community.
Cheers.
Thank you for
Cheers.
being here. Cheers.
Thank you.